Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning. How you doing, everybody? Monday, April 9th, 2018. Time for another show. We are in week 64, as I remembered to note for you all, of The Presidential Apprentice. Still running that stupid, long-running show. No one knows why they watched the original show. No one knows why we're all stuck watching this one either. But I have a pretty good idea that we could turn the channel if we do the right thing in the elections coming up. Greg Dworkin will be with us shortly, of course, to let us know, some of the details about how we might be able to get that accomplished and to refocus us on the news as we emerge from yet another weekend of slumber. Did the president go to... I don't think he went to Florida and played golf. I'm noticing less and less reportage of that, and I'm pleased by that, I guess, and I'm pleased that I'm able to avoid it for most of the weekend. We will, of course, catch up on all the other crazy things that happened and the crazy things going on in the minds of the people surrounding the president or telling him what to say through the television box. Much to discuss, of course, today. And I don't know, what's really occupied my mind during the morning, was, let's see, I got a couple of things, but we got a news of a story out of Oklahoma. You know, not a surprising place to have such a thing happen. But once again, I mean, I'm reading the same story. I would say normally, America is mourning the story of it, but America is not mourning the story. It just is happening, and we're taking note of it. The rest of the world is taking note of it only insofar as it notices localized stories that have nothing to do with anything, and there's no trend whatsoever to be discerned from it. But story out of Oklahoma, brought to us, as is frequently the case, by our Twitter friend SFDB, who tweets the stories of our NRA world, as they like to put it. Oklahoma gunslinger. That's not, I'm sure, what he would call himself now, but maybe previously. Oklahoma gunslinger fires rifle at person driving a family car, in fact, a pickup truck, I think, that he thought was stolen. Turns out the driver was his 13-year-old son, and he is dead. So please reach out, understand, respect gun culture. You got to understand why this particular guy would be motivated to fire his rifle at what he suspected was a fleeing car thief, but turned out to be his 13-year-old son. There's a lot about this story that I don't quite get. I don't know how together the family was in that. I'm reading, I don't know where's Delaware County, Oklahoma. This is being reported in the Tulsa World, but I'm not certain whether it's a Tulsa area, county, or what. Shooting occurred around 1:43 a.m. Saturday. Now, as the story goes, this particular guy, this Delaware County father is being held on a murder complaint in connection with the fatal shooting of his 13-year-old who was driving what the father thought was a stolen family vehicle, according to the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation. Bail has not yet been set for Mr. Tony Rutherford, 47, of rural Jay, Oklahoma, Jay. Shooting occurred at 1:43 a.m. Saturday. And Delaware County Sheriff deputies discovered the teen dead inside the pickup when they arrived at the scene. Rutherford was notified by neighbors after many vehicles were seen. And you got to watch out for the many vehicles type of situation. Many vehicles were seen at his older son's house, which was supposed to be vacant. Okay, now that, supposedly vacant, lots of vehicles there, problematic. Witnessed at 1:40 or so, I guess, in the morning, and I don't know what the neighbors are doing awake, but maybe the many vehicle owners are being particularly loud, and people woke up and said, hey, the house next to us is supposed to be vacant. Why so loud? So they call Rutherford. Rutherford drove to the house and witnessed someone driving his son's pickup truck, his older son's pickup truck. Rutherford gave chase and fired his rifle at the driver several times because that's totally allowed. I don't know what the law is in Oklahoma, but this is a continuing problem. Without even getting to the fact that the guy ends up, okay, we know the ending of the story. He kills the driver. Turns out the driver is 13-year-old son. Lots of questions. 1:43 in the morning. Why is this 13-year-old out? Why is dad shooting at even a fleeing car thief? That's not allowed. A lot of people don't know that. A lot of people really don't know that, which is amazing because they're super responsible gun owners and they know all the rules and blah, blah, blah. I do wonder from time to time what might happen if we really discussed these things as national stories rather than localized anomalies. And it's not a localized anomaly. And I bring that up because I was also reminded, and let's see if I can pull up the reminder that I got. But I was reminded along the way, and I knew it sounded familiar myself. It was it's a story I've heard before. When I told my family about it, I said it that way. We just got another one of these stories, and here we are. Our Twitter friend who tweets, the Twitter handle is here for the beer, except it's spelled wrong intentionally. Here, number 4, TEH, te, yes. Here for te beer. Sometimes it's difficult to give out those goofy handles like mine. Anyway, she says, I don't know. I thought that sounded familiar, and points to a relatively recent story. This one written up in the Miami Herald. It's not a Florida story. This one we treated as national for some reason. But the story was out of Alabama, which is not far from Miami in terms of, it's one state over sort of thing. So a world between Miami and Alabama. But hey, story was from very late December of 2017. And the story from Coleman, Alabama. Logan Trammell, who was apparently a bit of a hit as a local country and western musician, too. 22-year-old, same situation. Driving away in a family pickup truck, and guess what? Dad thought it was being stolen and comes running outside and takes pot shots at what he thinks is a fleeing thief, and instead kills his 22-year-old son. And, tragic story. Again, I kind of wonder what would happen if the NRA, if gun enthusiasts shared stories like this, and they would have to do it in more respectful tones than I'm willing to do it, I'm sure. But why not share these stories and say, this is in the rules. You're supposed to be 100% certain of your target acquisition before you shoot. And by the way, it's illegal everywhere to just fire at suspects for in particular for nonviolent crimes that are fleeing. You can't just shoot at a car, even if it's yours and you think somebody stole it. And let's not even bother. I don't think I should have to tell you that 9 times out of 10, the person driving your family car is in your family. What if you're wrong about that? Not to mention, I think when this happened, we also discussed that there was a story I can't even recall the location anymore. Somebody firing at a fleeing car thief. And this came up a little bit before this one. And it too was the second example of someone firing at a fleeing car thief. And it might actually have been a real thief, but they missed the car, and they were firing at a car that was rounding a corner, and they shot into the house behind the car. And at least in the second or maybe the first instance of it, I don't remember if it was the case in both instances, but they killed a person in the house that had nothing whatsoever to do with it. Anything. Wasn't stealing the car, wasn't a relative, wasn't even a particularly close neighbor. Just that person died because this guy was pretty sure that he was the ninja he needed to be to, like in the movies, fire after a fleeing car and bullseye the suspect, who would then, of course, be dead with his foot on the gas and probably smash into somebody else's house and ruin that. But it doesn't matter because I'm Dirty Harry. And in Dirty Harry, they just cut away rather than show the scene where Harry pays the damages to the guy's house because he shot somebody in a car. Dirty Harry doesn't shoot anybody in a car. I don't know. I didn't watch the movie. It doesn't matter. doesn't make a difference. The point, I think, is one that's slightly different. Don't fire your guns randomly into space, for one thing. I don't think there's anywhere in the country you can get away with shooting after a fleeing suspect, really even in a violent crime. Of course, when I say you can't get away with it, it's not legal. I guess it depends largely on what the cops are willing to write down when they clean this whole mess up. When they finally detain you, if you tell them the story and they say, why shoot, boy, I'd want to take a pot shot at you. I don't know. It's stereotypical. I'm giving you my best Montana accent, because this could happen in Montana too. New Jersey, for that matter. But if the cops write down, he was firing at an assailant he reasonably believed was threatening his life, if that's what they write down, even though they were fleeing in the other direction in a car, I guess you get away with it at that point. But other than that, I think that, I don't know why the NRA doesn't share, as a matter of course, stories about how things can go wrong with guns. And the answer, I guess, really is because if you talk about the things that can go wrong with guns, you're a communist and we hate you, and you hate the Constitution. So therefore, whatever. That's the story. They do publish the successful stories of people successfully shooting, sometimes fleeing felons, and say that's awesome. Because really, at bottom, the real problem is that NRA members and gun enthusiasts all would actually think it was terrific if that 13-year-old boy, well, you know what? If that 13-year-old boy had been somebody else's 13-year-old boy, and they really were stealing the truck, or perhaps even they weren't stealing the truck, they had borrowed the truck, stupidly, illegally, from the other 13-year-old who was, whatever it is. Here, you try it, you drive it. Well, he shouldn't have been, blah, 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 right? It would have been that kid's fault. Anyway, they can't wait to shoot somebody else's kid out joyriding in their car. It's a tragedy, though, because, gosh darn it, it turned out that, like I said, 9 times out of 10, the people driving your family car are members of your family, and you should probably keep that in mind, in addition to the fact that you're firing down a residential street. But hey, why should today be any different? All right, well, there's other news. Trump Tower was on fire, certainly. We'll round that up with Greg Dworkin, who is here to report that nobody, I don't think, fired a gun on his street all weekend. Probably.
I don't think so.
Yeah, they could have had, silencers on, which aren't silent, but, we still wouldn't have heard because your neighbors aren't that close to you.
Right. We're not part of gun culture, I'm told, right? We don't respect that culture as much as we should, I'm told.
I respect it so much.
But we do know that you're not supposed to point it at anybody, and that you really should assume it's loaded, and you're supposed to make sure you know what your target is, and you're also supposed to make sure what's beyond your target. That's all part of the deal.
Right.
But we don't know that because we're not part of that culture.
No, we don't. So we're disqualified from the debate. Unfortunately, we can't tell people that. It's not allowed. Because there was a time that I know somebody that said clip, and oh man, you know how you can't help people after that.
Right. You're just totally disqualified. So there's a lot to talk about today. Let's talk about the elections in November coming closer. I think that's always a fun topic to at least explore a little bit. There's this new Reuters poll that's out, Ipsos Reuters.
Okay.
I love the title, Exclusive. As elections near, many older, educated white voters shift away from Trump's party.
Okay. I'm for that.
All those cranky white guys shaking their hands and fists at clouds?
Yeah. Are they educated?
They're voting for us.
All right. What, me? You and
older
I.
white, educated voters
helped the older
Donald
people.
Trump win the White House in 2016. Did you know that?
It wasn't me.
Okay. Now that they're trending toward Democrats in such numbers that their ballots could tip the scales in tight congressional races from New Jersey to California, that would be like from one side of the country to the other, for those of you who don't know your geography. A new Reuters Ipsos poll and a data analysis of competitive districts shows a lot. Nationwide, over the age of 60 with college degrees now favor Democrats over Republicans for Congress by 2 points.
Okay.
During the same period in 2016, that same group favored Republicans for Congress by 10. So that's a 12-point swing in our favor.
Oh, yeah, right.
Okay.
Okay.
So college degrees, very much so, and white college degrees, very much so. Overall, there's also been improvement as well. So where do we have here? The 12-point swing is one of the largest shifts in support towards Democrats that the Reuters Ipsos poll has measured over the past 2 years. If that trend continues, Republicans will struggle to keep control of the House of Representatives and possibly the Senate in the November elections, potentially dooming President Donald Trump's legislative agenda as if he has one.
Well,
right?
yes.
But I like this quote. The real core for the Republicans is white, older white, and if they're losing ground there, they're going to have a tsunami, said Larry Sabato, University of Virginia political scientist who closely tracks political races. Yep, that's what he does. Yep, that's what he does for a living.
He's also an older white.
Yeah. If that continues to November, they're toast.
Okay, toast.
I
remember that.
You know, I like it when they're like, I don't know, I'm not sure. I went to my assertiveness training and I couldn't figure out how I felt about it. You know, no, he says they're toast.
Okay,
I like that.
Yeah. Well, I remember it. We used to talk about toast all the time, and that was
You're Chris Christie.
Chris
I said
Christie.
Chris Christie was toast, and he was.
Yeah. Toast. What?
Toast.
I didn't even.
Asked about the swing, Republican National Committee Chairwoman Rona, who used to be Romney McDaniel,
Yes.
cited. That's how they put it in Reuters.
Used to be.
You know, AP has a style guide, but I don't know if Reuters does. But the Reuters style guide is Rona
Swing it.
used to be Romney McDaniel. That's how you have to name her. Cited robust fundraising and said the party would field strong campaigns in battleground states. So that's a real good counter, Sue, to Larry Sabato saying you're toast. Oh, we're not toast because, like, we're really going to try.
Yeah, well.
Okay.
Give it the old non-college try, I say.
Mm-hmm.
Older white non-college try.
The potential impact of any swing to Democrats is magnified given that older educated adults are reliable voters. They also make up a sizable portion of the voting population in many districts where elections are close. I'm just thinking Florida today. How they vote could decide elections in as many as 26 competitive congressional districts where Democrats have a shot at winning. A Reuters analysis of U.S. Census data shows highly educated older voters make up about 5 to 10% of the population in those areas. And, of course, Democrats need to pick out 24 seats to win control. More broadly, older white Americans, regardless of their level of education, are still more likely to vote for Republicans than Democrats, but the Republican advantage with this group has been trimmed by about 5 points when comparing the first quarter of 2018 with the first quarter of 2016. So, in other words, the college folks are going with the Democrats. Overall, non-college voters, which are Trump's core.
Yes.
His core is not college-educated voters. It's non-college voters. That's who he's counting on to try to keep the House, in particular, and the House and Senate, in Republican hands. Well, here's the other end of the age group. This one is from, of course, the L.A. Times. 100,000 California teenagers. The L.A. Times, I say, of course, because it's a California story. 100,000 California teenagers are now pre-registered to vote.
All right.
California's effort to get 16 and 17-year-olds to pre-register has now enlisted 100,000 teenagers, according to information released by Secretary of State Alex Padilla. This is a big milestone. I'm optimistic it's going to translate into action at the ballot box. This program started in 2016, and about 43% of the pre-registrants were California teenagers who chose to be unaffiliated. 43%. 38% Democratic Party and 10% Republican.
And he joined the American Independent Party or whatever it is, the one that people joined by accident.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I don't know how many people joined Lieberman for Connecticut or whatever he called it.
Yeah, what was that again? Connecticut for
Party
Lieberman.
That was a party of one, so I don't think anybody else was allowed in.
Right. Well, we learned that a week or two ago that I guess there's an American Independent Party, and their biggest recruiting point is people think they're registering as independent when they pick that. And,
usually, when I see recruiters like that, my first question is, "Hi, how are you? Are you Nazis?"
And typically, yes. It's a fringe right-wing party, but they of course deny it. How people are making conscious decisions about that, and then of course they get to the polls and they try to vote in a major party primary as no party preference, and they're told, no, you're registered in a party. I'm so mad, and the system is rigged or something. So don't do that, kids.
Yeah, don't do that. We also have, let's see, what else do we have here? This one is from the Washington Post. I don't even think I have it in the list, so I'll just pop it toward the bottom here. GOP increasingly fears loss of House, focuses on saving Senate majority. I mean, when we talk about the fact that there's a blue wave and that the House really is increasingly in play, which is a nice, polite way to put it, isn't just happy talk. I mean, these are Republicans who are basically saying this, and independent observers. GOP increasingly fears loss of House, focuses on saving Senate. Democratic enthusiasm is surging in suburban districts that House Republicans are struggling to fortify, causing GOP officials, donors, and strategists to fret. Fretting is bad for you. Don't fret.
All right.
Don't sweat. Don't fret. Just, adopt a candidate and go work for him. That's the best way to deal with this. They have greater confidence in the more rural red states Trump won convincingly that make up the bulk of the Senate. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and his allies are seeking to capitalize on concerns about the House. He's leading an effort to motivate conservative voters by reminding them that his side of the Capitol has the unilateral power to confirm federal judges and Trump administration nominees. So basically what they're saying is, well, look, the House, we may lose the House, but if you want more Neil Gorsuches, you got to vote for us, because that's basically what we do.
That is their proudest accomplishment. I mean, if it's an accomplishment, they think so, certainly.
Mm-hmm. So, it's always interesting, because then you look at the constituencies who really are Trump voters. This one is from CNBC.
Okay.
John Harwood, Trumpist GOP doesn't mind Wall Street's tariff heartburn.
Has two separate words, a tariff heartburn.
Yeah, and his point is, whereas Ryan and McConnell are still advocating for the business wing of the Republican Party, which consists of about 9 people in the Chamber of Commerce these days, and think that these tariffs are terrible, the Republicans who are running for office say, you know what, let's just go with it.
All right.
Here's their argument. Veteran Republican Representative Tom Cole, Oklahoma.
Okay.
Outside the agricultural areas, which will remain safely Republican in this cycle, he thinks so. Let's see what happens. The trade tariff issue probably helps more than it hurts. Somebody's finally doing something about China, which has simply ripped us off since we let them into the WTO. This is a net plus. And Josh Holmes, a top GOP Senate strategist, who I often think gets stuff wrong, from a Senate lens, it's helpful, referring to Trump's America First combination of tariffs and immigration. Tossing away prepared remarks on tax cuts, the president in West Virginia yesterday emphasized both issues as he took aim against vulnerable Democrat Joe Manchin. As for investor fears that have sent markets tumbling, Holmes said, generally the people freaking out are people with a lot of money, and there aren't that many people with a lot of money. So he could have added, so screw him.
I guess, I mean, that's
right.
That's all right.
And it's just, I'm reading this and shaking my head like you are. And then the next paragraph, that reflects the ongoing evolution of a Republican Party increasingly dependent on white working class voters, while better educated voters and growing globally linked sectors of the economy drift towards Democrats. We were just talking about the fact that older college-educated voters, white voters, are trending Democrat. And so what they have is, okay, we're going to go with the non-college white voters, and they're going to like this. And we'll do stuff that's going to help them. But the article goes on to say, but the tax cut is not shelter Republicans as much as they once hoped. The party holding the White House nearly always loses congressional seats, but Republicans fear results of recent special elections foreshadow losses large enough to hand Democrats control of both chambers.
I look forward to that.
Dave Wasserman.
What is he talking about, this guy, though? I mean, Republicans, screw the people with lots of money. I mean, I'm glad, but when did that happen?
Yeah, I mean, is the Republican Party, what's going on here? Well, we'll get to that. I think E.J. Dionne has a piece that sort of dwells on that.
Okay.
But Dave Wasserman, a top analyst of House races at the Cook Political Report, draws a striking conclusion from the failure of ads touting tax cuts to save the Republican seeking the Pittsburgh area seat. That was Pennsylvania 18 that Conor Lamb won. Public support for the tax cuts is weak enough, he says, that attention on tariffs or even the president's relationship with porn star Stormy Daniels helps Trump's approval ratings.
Okay, right.
You read that one and say, what?
I do believe that there's a sector where that is true.
He's saying that the Republican tax cuts is such a bad idea that even Stormy Daniels helps Trump more than the tax cuts do.
I see. Okay. Well, it might be true. All right. Well, he'd probably trade it, though. Trump himself. I would trade the tax cut for another go-around with Stormy Daniels, as long as she keeps her mouth shut.
And then Harbaugh goes on to say, whether or not any of this makes any difference is unclear. And in any event, survival of the GOP's majority requires reducing its current double-digit deficit among independents. Since that deficit stems largely from consistent concerns about Trump, even the most focused and aggressive Republican campaigns have limited ability to alter it. Representative Cole concluded, there's things we can control, but we can't control the president.
That's true. I mean,
that is true. It's
always
so
true.
Here's our whole strategy. It's all thought out. It's the best we can do. We're playing those weak cards. Remember politics and poker?
Yeah.
You got to have the cards. We're playing the cards we have, but then there's a president, and he's the Joker. And what are we going to do?
Yeah, he's not supposed to be in the game. He doesn't count for anything. Once you discover there's a Joker in the deck, the whole shuffle's ruined. We don't know what to do. The whole thing goes to hell. But whatever. We'll see what happens.
But he's right.
Yeah, that's true, and we don't control the president. You're not supposed to control the president, but he's supposed to be reliably a member of your party, but he's not this time. So, all right, well, let's take a short break and try once again to make sense of the world after this. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching KagroX or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Still here with Greg Dworkin, rounding up the news of the weekend and the things you need to know in order to make sense of the things that don't make any sense upcoming this week. All right, where do we leave off here?
So we were talking about Trump constituency and where they stand these days. And this one is from the Washington Post. Farmers who propelled Trump to presidency fear becoming pawns in the trade war. Remember, the whole concept here. The theme that we're going with is that the Republican Party is changing. It's becoming more Trumpy. And what that means, among other things, is that college-educated voters, including white college-educated voters, including older white college-educated voters, are deserting Republicans for the Democrats, which puts the suburbs in play and is the likely instrument, if it happens, of a Democratic House takeover. At the same time, Republicans are consciously trying to play for non-college whites as their new base, not the older whites, college and otherwise, that it used to be. And so as a result, everything they do, every move they do is play to the base, and you see that. This is farmers who propelled Trump to presidency, fear becoming pawns in trade war. That's a problem because that's who he's playing to. Remember, Tom Cole said, don't worry about the farm states. They're ours. We don't have to worry about it. Yeah, you do.
Yeah. Well, I guess they do. And they've been surprisingly attentive.
Remember hog farmers? We talked about hog farmers.
Yeah, I say surprisingly attentive, but they've been attentive to the tariff issue, almost as if they actually read newspapers and knew what might affect their business interests. That's nice.
You know, the thing is, Trump is playing to what he thinks is his base as if it's homogeneous. We've talked about the show a lot on the show that it's not. So what might attract, let's say, people in Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania may not attract people in Iowa or other parts of the Midwest, particularly if you're the farmers who are voting, not the small town business people who are just looking to expand jobs and improve life there. This story from Minnesota, many of the farmers who helped propel Donald Trump to the presidency fear becoming pawns in his escalating trade war with China, which threatens markets for soybeans, corn, and other lifeblood crops in the upper Midwest. A former GOP congressional aide, Jim Hagedorn, and Treasury official running for an open House seat, says they should keep their faith in Trump. He understands how important it is, as if that's going to make up for the fact that he's threatening a 25% tariff on soybeans.
Yeah, and he doesn't understand that. But
It's a $2 billion business in Minnesota, so he thinks that he just says have faith in Trump and that's going to be good enough.
Yeah, I guess he thinks so. He
a
doesn't
40-cent
know how...
drop in soybeans like we saw on Wednesday meant $50,000 of value evaporating out of my bottom line, said Pete Fish, the 33-year-old president of the Minnesota Soybean Growers Association. Last time I talked to our banker, he told me all of his clients, and they're all farmers, only 4 made money last year. But this year was looking tough even before the tariffs.
Yeah, well, you know, Trump does understand it. For him, soybeans isn't that one of those things that gets traded on the commodities exchange? I don't play in that, but I have friends who do, and they loved it because they bought, you know, or they shorted soybean futures or whatever it is you would be doing in this case.
So this is Minnesota's first congressional district. Tim Walz is retiring as a Democrat. He's going to run for governor, opening up a seat for Trump because Trump won that area by 15 points. Hagedorn, 65, is considered the best GOP candidate to try to turn that blue seat red, and that will happen in some places, even as red seats are turning blue. A third of the state's soybean crop comes from the district. It's also home to Martin County, the top hog-producing county in the state, the bacon capital of the U.S.
Oh, really?
And China's tariffs on pork is going to hit there, too. So it'll be very interesting to see how a guy like Hagedorn does, given this.
Yes, and who he blames for it. I suppose if the television says it's Hillary Clinton, he may be inclined to believe that.
So E.J. Dionne tries to summarize that. He's got a piece called Trump's Politics of Outrage is Failing Him.
Uh-oh.
How he's doubled down on a lot of this stuff that revolts everybody else. Revulsion of Trump is now the driving force in American politics, and this petrifies the traditional GOP. Responding to the outcome of last week's election in Wisconsin, a candidate backed by Democrats won an open state Supreme Court seat for the first time since 1995. Normally loyal Republicans of the Wall Street Journal's editorial page took off their gloves. If Mr. Trump is the main issue on Election Day in November, the paper wrote, all the evidence now points to an electoral wipeout, like President Barack Obama's in 2010, and this time against the Republicans.
I just heard that wasn't true or something.
Yeah, well, you also heard something about toast from Larry Sabato. I mean, the signs are out there, you know, and they're aware. Trump's latest rape comments, he was talking about the caravan coming up from Mexico, illustrated his obsession with pushing issues that appeal to Fox News and conservative talk radio fans at the expense of building his standing with the broader electorate. His outburst came last Thursday at a West Virginia event where he was supposed to be touting the tax cuts. But after calling his planned speech boring and tossing the pages into the air, he proceeded to praise himself for his 2015 announcement speech in which he declared the Mexican immigrants were rapists without offering any proof. He said women coming to the U.S. in the so-called caravans he's been ranting about incessantly are raped at levels that nobody has ever seen before. I didn't realize there were levels of rapes that, you can go into. I'm not going to touch that one. Then came the effort to create an enemy. They don't want to mention that, Trump said, but he's discovering that trashing a vaguely defined they is not as effective as deriding and abusing flesh and blood foes. If there's a rational explanation for his seemingly erratic and often outrageous behavior in recent days, I would add, this isn't Dionne, I would add, it's because he's crazy. But what EJ says is it involves the calculation that the coalition he built in 2016 lacks both a clear sense of who the adversary is and a set of causes around which it can rally. In other words, he doesn't have Clinton's emails.
Yeah.
While there is some conflict in the polling about Trump, a consistent finding is those who strongly oppose him far outnumber those who are enthusiastically for him. Morning Consult poll last week, and in that poll, I believe Trump had his lowest level ever in that poll, which tends to favor him. For example, found that overall 54% of registered voters disapproved of Trump's performance, while 41% approved. That's a Trump-friendly poll. More important is the fact that 41% strongly disapproved of him and only 19% strongly approved. So seen another way, the poll showed that 3/4 of those who disapprove of Trump hold intense feelings against him. Less than half of those who approve are comparably fervent. Trump's opponents are deeply motivated to put a check on his presidency. His supporters are discouraged and demobilized. A fifth of the country can provide an ample audience for a cable network and a lot of radio hosts. It's not enough to win an election. In the nominally nonpartisan Wisconsin race, as Michael Tomasky noted in the Daily Beast, several counties that had moved from Obama to Trump swung back to Rebecca Dollett, the choice strongly endorsed by Democrats, and this came in a low turnout race. In Obama years, small turnouts benefited Republicans. The energy gap means this pattern is now reversed. Then, a Washington Post Kaiser Family Foundation poll released Friday brought home additional concrete results of this imbalance. It found an astonishing 1 in 5 Americans reporting that they had joined protests and rallies since the beginning of 2016, and that 70% of them disapproved of Trump. Now, by the way, a lot of those are older voters who don't normally come out and protest, at least they haven't since the 60s. So they're coming back. And they're not happy about Trump. So the overall picture is one of Trump having shaky performance with independents, shaky performance with those who are willing to give him a chance but didn't like him. He's trying to shore up his performance with his core constituents who still love him, but they are not numerous enough to win. And if everybody else doesn't support him, if he doesn't have his enablers, and if he doesn't have the go-along tribal, I'll just vote Republican like I always do, then they're going to lose big in November, and that's what all the signs appear to say, without guaranteeing it, without being overconfident about it. Two terms I hate when it's applied to Democrats, because Democrats aren't overconfident about anything. That's the way Republicans roll.
True, but they
we
like
just
to print
don't do
it
that.
anyway.
It's not in our DNA. We're always worrying about it.
We couldn't be. We're too much in disarray. How can you be
Exactly.
overconfident in disarray?
So, in a way, everything that I told you this morning is a setup for this question.
Uh-oh.
Because the Republicans are seeing the writing on the wall, they understand that they're more likely than not in a close race. It's not guaranteed, but more likely than not to lose the House than win it. And now they feel that the Senate is threatened. They need a rallying point, and they don't have one, as EJ was saying. They don't have, the clear foe and the clear issue. So now they're trying to make one. And you know what they picked?
It's not Christmas again, is it?
No.
Okay. No.
Impeachment.
Oh?
The thing that
They
we
picked
are
that.
going out of our way not to talk about, they want to now talk about.
Oh.
You don't
that seems
understand, they
familiar.
say. If you vote for a Democrat, they're going to impeach Trump. Get out there and vote.
Okay.
And the Democrats are saying,
not wrong.
we keep not talking about this. What are you talking about? No. You're secretly wanting to impeach him. I know you are. Look at this one sign I found from a 100,000 person march. Right there. Look at that billboard. It says impeachment.
Right.
You guys are trying to impeach him. We got to rally the base around this. It's the only way to protect this. That's their new rallying cry. Because Pelosi isn't working. Tax cuts aren't working.
No.
They got to have something. That's like the new Holy Grail.
Okay.
So what do you think about that?
I don't know. I am not. I don't know what to think about it when it comes to what we should.
That's the question. What should we do about it?
Nothing.
I've
let
always
them
taken
do.
the point of view, as you know,
Yeah.
don't stick a sharp stick in their eye.
Yeah.
If you run on impeachment, you're just stirring them up because that's the thing they're looking for. Leave that alone.
Yes.
You can investigate. That's fine. Say you'll
I
do an
guess
honest investigation.
that's
You don't
possible.
need people like Devin Nunes. That's cool.
Yeah.
And then go
And
where the
they'll-
data takes you.
I mean, I think that's certainly what candidates will do. Is what they'll be advised to do. And from time to time, someone will be honest and they'll ask them a question like, okay, but supposing you find all of this stuff and then you have Trump dead to rights, what would you vote to impeach him? And somebody will say, yeah, I probably would. And that'll be, oh my God, see, that's what they're pursuing. Well, it might be what we're pursuing.
Articles here so you could just take a look at them.
Yeah, I'm just, I am sick to death with, with punditry about, well, don't mention, and I get it already. We all get it. Shh. People are going to mention it anyway. That's not a personal affront to you or your column. It's just the way people think and the way people talk. And the more, I don't know, the more, now it seems to me like the more columns denying that impeachment is on the table, it only fuels the other side's claims that, look, they keep printing that word. And so only you progressives are not allowed to use that word. I am allowed to admonish you not to use that word and therefore use that word, which only fuels things that much more. The whole thing is kind of stupid. I say get out of the way. Okay.
So,
yes.
It's just so weird, and by the way, reminds me of Kevin Williamson.
Oh?
Well, see, the whole thing is, the entire conservative window-sphere here, the whole
nice.
What is it? Ecosphere, whatever you want to call it, is built on outraged, over-the-edge stuff.
Yes.
Paul Krugman had a column about this, and he was trying to limit it just to economics. And he's basically saying, how come it's so hard for ordinary publications like the New York Times or the Atlantic to find reasonable, non-edgy, obnoxious conservatives to write about stuff from a conservative point of view?
Non-obnoxious.
Yeah, and his answer is because nobody wants to read them.
That's true. They're boring.
They're boring. They have no constituency. If you have a constituency, you're going to be a Laura Ingraham type.
Yes.
And so you're not going to be credible. And if you're credible, you're not going to have an audience. And that's why they're just struggling so much.
No one rises to prominence on the conservative side of the ledger, or really probably anywhere, without being occasionally outrageous and provocative. It's coached into these guys. And so
that's his point. And that's what he's talking about in terms of economics. But I extend it to, the Kevin Williamsons of the world.
Yes.
So, and then look at this discussion about impeachment, right? The Democrats are saying, the best thing to do is to just, do a proper investigation. Then we'll see where it goes. And Republicans are screaming, that means that he'll be impeached. Actually, it probably does, but that's not the point.
That's
you see, point. You're just confirming,
Right.
How do you talk to people like that?
You can't, and honestly, you should not necessarily even waste your time talking to the other people about not talking about that with those people. Just honestly, this is one of the things that's driving me crazy about it. But this is true of a lot of things, and
I bring it up because it's going to be an issue.
What it
so
is.
Might as well hash it out now.
Yeah, it's going to be an issue, and that's the way it's going to be handled. We're just going to get one after another of pundits who want the electoral strategy on the ground level for individual candidates to be stay away from mentioning impeachment because it's just going to get you into a circle of, circular pattern of gotcha questioning, trying to get you on the record saying yes to it. And of course, my having printed this opinion piece saying so will also prompt reporters to start asking Democrats that question. But my doing it is thoughtful and centrist, whereas you dirty hippie mentioning of the I word is provocative and going to lose us the elections. And that's what drives me crazy.
Mm.
But
let me give you the headlines. This
exists.
One was in the New York Times. Republicans seize on impeachment for edge in 2018 midterms. The other one is from Newsweek. Republicans warn Trump could be impeached if Democrats win the midterm election. Similar themes. I'll go with Jonathan Martin's story in the New York Times.
All right.
As Republican leaders scramble to stave off a Democratic wave, or at least mitigate their party's losses in November, a strategy is emerging on the right for how to energize conservatives and drive a wedge between the anti-Trump left and moderate voters. warned that Democrats will immediately move to impeach President Trump if they capture the House. What began last year as blaring political hyperbole on the right, the stuff of bold-letter direct mail fundraising pitches from little-known groups warning of a looming American coup, is now steadily drifting into the main currents of the 2018 message for Republicans. And that's how it works, isn't it? Yeah. The appeals have become a surefire way for candidates to raise small contributions from grassroots conservatives who are devoted to Mr. Trump, that small segment who are. Veteran Republican fundraisers say, but party strategists also believe that floating the possibility of impeachment can also act as a sort of scared straight motivational tool for turnout. Last week, Ted Cruz of Texas used his re-election kickoff to introduce a video featuring a faux news anchor reading would-be headlines were conservatives not to vote in November. Senate Majority Leader Schumer announced the impeachment trial of President Trump, one of the anchors says. So just to give you an idea how they're using it.
Oh, my God. That's a little bit like the actual reality from a few years ago, and we totally survived it.
Mm. So Corey Lewandowski says everybody's told Trump that. The threat of impeachment is something that unifies everybody in the party, even if you're not a big Trump supporter. So in other words, go back to the stuff we were going over this morning. Tax cuts failed. They're losing the over 60 white college voters, who, by the way, this is not going to be a rallying cry for. They're losing kids, who, by the way, this is not going to be a rallying cry for. So this is yet again one of those things that is only aimed at the Republican Trumpian base, who is now non-college white voters, trying to rev them up to vote. And that's balanced against, on the other side of the ledger, an enormously motivated Democratic base and others who just loathe Trump. So it's really going to be, so because they loathe Trump, a lot of them want to hear, well, I just want you to say you're going to impeach them. That's right. Fine. You can do that in certain parts of Massachusetts, and you can do that if you're maybe representing Ann Arbor, but you can't do that everywhere else. And just to illustrate that, I got a local story for you that I'm going to finish with today, just putting this all in perspective. Representative Elizabeth Esty from My Connecticut 5 is not going to be running because she's in the midst of a scandal.
Yeah.
And the scandal is that her chief of staff was accused of attacking a woman, and Esty sort of defended him, or at least didn't fire him for several months, and then gave him an NDA, and then actually recommended him to one of our local gun control groups.
Oh.
And so everybody said, that's ridiculous. And she said, okay, well, I'm not running.
Okay. Well, I guess that's what you should do.
Yeah. I mean, so it was pretty bad judgment on her part, who has otherwise been an excellent representative, who has been there for Newtown. We all support her. Even our Republican local representatives wrote letters of support for her in the local paper. Not good enough. Not with that.
Strange where blind spots fall.
Yeah. But, it is what it is. Yeah. So now there's going to be a competitive election for Connecticut 5. And I sent you two things. I sent you the story in the local paper, the Danbury News-Times. Esty's departure gives GOP a shot at regaining 5th District congressional seat. And what I wanted to show you is that with that discussion about who some of the people she might be running against, it's still going to lean Democratic, and the Democrat will probably win. But what I sent you, you could see about toward the bottom of that list I sent you, is a graphic which shows the towns that make up Connecticut 5. And it shows you in blue which town voted for Clinton, and in red which town voted for Trump.
Yeah. What's wrong with you?
Do you see that graphic?
I do. I see it.
And it's shame these towns. I mean, that's typical for Connecticut, who everybody thinks of as a blue state, but it's a blue state because the blue candidate generally wins by a little, not because it's so overwhelmingly blue like D.C. that you just don't even have a chance to run if you're Republican. And so there's a lot of Connecticut Republicans that are still left. And the ones in those towns, some of them, like in Watertown or Harwinton or Burlington, Litchfield, Walcott, Southbury has a lot of retirees. And
Okay.
so, is Trump going to win over those voters the next time? Unclear. And what will happen in 2018 and who will those folks vote for? Also unclear. But you can see how trying to play for, well, if you vote for somebody who's a Democrat to replace Esty, they're going to impeach Trump. You can see how that might actually have some kind of effect, because there are red places in those blue districts that you can go ahead and try and play to.
Yeah, I mean, you can always try that, and they will. And
They will.
yeah, I
and
wonder how
some places it'll work because, it's if you got a Trump plus 20 district, it might.
it might.
It might not because, again, look at Connor Lamb. They tried that with Pelosi because they thought it was brilliant. It didn't work. And they tried that with tax cuts and they thought it was brilliant and it didn't work. And clearly this was not their first choice. This is like plan D.
Yes.
But I'm just saying, be aware of it. It's going to be there. That's what they're doing.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot to be aware of about that issue. Take it to California, where 100,000 teenagers have pre-registered, and sell it to them as the most exciting thing to happen to Washington, D.C. politics in history. Wouldn't that be exciting? We've never impeached and removed a president in midterm before. This would be a first. How exciting. You remember how Trump's script for his tax cut was so boring and dumb? The script for keeping an idiot president for 4 years is dumb too. Let's throw that out. Let's shake things up. And so I wonder if that could be sold as a fun, innovative, and screw Washington kind of thing to do.
It might motivate him to vote, and we'll have to see what happens.
I mean,
that's the landscape for now. You got those different constituencies, and the same message doesn't resonate with everybody. And with that, I'll leave it and see if you want to say more about it. But this is great work, and speak to my friend David Waldman Kagro in the morning. Start of a new week.
Yes.
And I'll be back Wednesday, and I'm sure we'll talk some more.
Yeah, the week will be old by then. Okay. Very good. Thanks, Greg. Plenty to talk about, as usual, and lots to occupy us for the second hour. There's something to that, by the way, the idea of, why play impeachment the traditional way? The Democrats will, let's not fool ourselves, they will come down strategically on that position and say that the thing to do is don't mention it, and don't say it, and don't promise anything, and don't talk about it, and don't even repeat the word back to them, and horrors of horrors, this will never happen. I say that there's an excitement factor to it that they tapped into in California in the gubernatorial recall. I mean, the script was flipped a little bit in that it was a boring Democrat in office, and the prospect of a celebrity Republican tough guy to be put in his place. And so that probably had as much, if not more, to do with generating the excitement. But there's some genuine excitement for the possibility of saying, of just declaring outright, finally, no, Donald Trump is too dumb and incompetent to hold this position. We should get rid of him. Of course, then there's also the other complication of, well, what do you do about Mike Pence? To which some people simply reply, impeach him first or impeach him also. And then there's of course, the even more grandiose dream of, well, if we do that impeachment while the House is Democratic, then impeaching the president and vice president leaves us with the Speaker of the House constitutionally as the next in line to the presidency, and in a Democratic House, that would be a Democratic president. It may or may not be Nancy Pelosi. I've seen even more. And if you really want to fantasize, you see people explaining, it's quite true that it is the case that the Speaker of the House doesn't have to be a member of the House, and so they say, and we'll make it Hillary Clinton, and then she'll be the president, and why not? I mean, I have no objection to spinning those stories in your head or even saying them out loud. I don't venture a guess as to the likelihood. Except to say not very, but what will keep me engaged in the discussion more than anything else is, of course, the fact that, once again, we're going to find ourselves very likely in a situation where impeachment is more warranted than ever, and it would be used in almost precisely the way the founders envisioned it should be used, because there are facial constitutional violations going on all the time, from the beginning, openly and notoriously. And I'm just staying here with, you know what? I would even say I could do it all without Russia. Emoluments and Puerto Rico, I'm done. Impeachment is otherwise, under normal circumstances, the theory of impeachment, what the founders thought this thing was for, open and shut case. You've murdered an American territory, essentially, through neglect, and the emoluments. Done and done. Now, it may also be that I say you can do it without including Russia, and all right, well, there might be some emoluments coming from Russia and or Russians or former Soviet republics or whatever, so there might be some mixing there. But I guess if you also threw in, well, you know, the House might also, or the White House, that is, might be also full of spies who are trading state secrets for cash, and in addition to which the election wasn't won legitimately for various reasons, and okay, so that's just icing on the cake, as far as I'm concerned. But I don't know why. I don't know what advantage there would be necessarily. I'm not advocating that you should say, okay, yes, well, the answer is yes, impeachment, but it won't be about Russia. I don't know. If for whatever reason that comforts you and you think you can make a better case that way, go for it. I won't argue with you about it. But yeah, I can't stand by again, as I watched happen in the George W. Bush administration, and say that a significant and serious case for impeachment has to be ignored again for political reasons. I understand the calculus. I understand the claims being made. I understand that they think they're vindicated from the last time. But it can't be the case that Republicans continue to get to violate the Constitution facially in such egregious ways and never face impeachment because something, and Democrats don't do that. When, by the way, they keep impeaching Democrats. Weird. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We nearly forgot that it was our 1 minute top of the hour break and not our more exciting and relaxing 2 minute break. But I'm over that now. Yes, all right, let's catch up with some of the comments circulating via Twitter and remind everybody who might be brand new to the show. I'm sure there's thousands of listeners tuning in for the first time today. You can reach me during the show most effectively. I would guess it's most effective to go with a Twitter contact. My name on Twitter, of course, Kagrox, Kagrox, and that's what accounts for it being the Kagro in the Morning Show, despite the fact that my name is not Kagro or X. It's David Waldman. Long story, but that's how you can make it work on Twitter. And if you do, when you do, I should count on the fact that you're going to. Do include, please, the Kagro in the Morning, or KITM hashtag, because that makes things linger a little bit longer. I have a nice column open for those comments. Occasionally, a few interlopers using the same KITM initials to describe some other stupid program or whatever, or hundreds of stupid programs out there, I'm sure, that use the same initials, but gives your comment a fighting chance to join in the mix here. Let's see. Along the way, Mad Hatter, who, by the way, tweets on I describe people, I say, well, Mad Hatter has tweeted this thing, and not always will you be able to go to Twitter and type in @Mad Hatter and get this person. And in fact, you will not if you simply do that. They simply describe themselves as Mad Hatter. It is ELROND. Elrond, I guess, is how you might say it out loud. I don't know how you say it out loud, Mad Hatter. But 50. ELROND 50. Just so that we should all be following one another. And then I wouldn't have to do this, except that I wouldn't know for sure whether you're all following one another, and I would do this anyway. But pointing out in terms of potential swing districts to coincide with Greg's discussion of them, take a look. We have here listed Texas districts. Texas 2nd, 7th, and 22nd congressional districts it is suggested, for the college-educated and minority voters, potential swing districts. So those of you who are in charge of marshaling national resources for these contests, please do take a look. And for the rest of us, we'll just say, I'll keep that in mind. And then when the election results come in, I can point back to the show and say, Mad Hatter really had it right. Check it out. We knew before everybody else did. Jingy, who, of course, is real Jingy, because you hate those fake Jingies. He's out there listening along and was thanking us for clarifying the point that Greg made about tariff heartburn being different words. Right? It's not tariff heartburn, but, or rather, it sounded a lot like tariff heartburn, but like, what does that even mean? Is that somebody's name? Is that like one of the other skaters that attacked Nancy Kerrigan? Is that who it was? No, probably a different one. So look at that. So glad, by the way, he's saying it was important to him, not that we clarify that it wasn't tariff heartburn, but tariff heartburn. This was different, he says, from terror heartburn or fartburn, which is the after effect of a particular kind of gaseous expulsion I thought he was referring to. Okay, gotcha. Now we're on the same page here. Let's see. Chief Beef Loco, or Prian, as he sometimes calls himself. Let's see. Where are we here? Don't let Wall Street bankrupt your farms and business. He's addressing our Midwestern friends here. Hashtagging this whole thing, by the way. Idaho, Minnesota, Iowa, Indiana, Ohio, Wisconsin. Indiana's in there twice. That's how important it is. Nebraska and Utah. Don't let Wall Street bankrupt your farms and businesses with tariffs. Steve Mnuchin will foreclose on your farm without blinking, and Trump couldn't care less. That's the truth, like it or not. And probably true. Although, I don't know if do you think it's high on his list of foreclose on farms? I mean, he'll foreclose on anything he's got an interest in, I'm sure. If he's got an interest in farms, of course, it would be for foreclosing on them and probably developing housing on them instead. But, what's the difference if it's your farm and you don't get to keep it anymore? Here's a note. We won't be following this story closely, but it's definitely of some interest and should note it. Kate Sherrill noting for us, according to the New York Daily News, Bill Cosby's retrial starts today. So I guess that's what Republicans will run on. Bill Cosby is a big Democrat and it's your fault. And therefore something. Let's see. What is this? This just in, according to the New York Daily News. I don't know how old that is, but the tweet says it's just in. A topless Bill Cosby protester was tackled and cuffed by police outside the Philadelphia courtroom. I don't know what that's about. I'm kind of curious. I mean, what are you doing? It's cold. It's not a warm day. I mean, wait for later in the week. The weather's going to be crazy. Around here, they were actually predicting some light snow this morning. I did not see it happening, but that means, of course, temperatures in the low 30s will, by the end of the week, be in the mid-80s. That would be a much better day to do topless protesting, I would think. But there she is, pixeled out and everything. And they've thoughtfully sent a woman officer after her to do the tackling. There's a plenty big guy chasing too, but it looks like he's hoping that the woman officer will do the tackling here. A topless protester was arrested. I'd like to know the thinking. Arrested after she shed her shirt and darted in front of Bill Cosby outside his sexual assault trial Monday. I mean, I have a pretty good guess at what the protest was. I mean, it wouldn't have been my first choice. It would be a lot less effective if I did it, certainly. But you never know. Anyway, the woman was tackled to the ground and into some bushes lining the sidewalk. That's nice. Pleasant landscaping. Always a good part of any story. What? Okay. But into the bushes lining the sidewalk by a group of police officers almost immediately after she ran past the comedian. Sort of, I guess still that. In front of the Norristown, Pennsylvania courtroom. She had Cosby rapists sick. That is to say, the T was missing. Cosby rapists, and also Women's Lives Matter, and the names of numerous Cosby accusers written across her body in red and black paint. And Cosby rapists I should just go ahead and say rapist, but I mean, it is a fact that it doesn't have the T. That is on her back, so somebody had to do that for her. So it's not her fault. She could probably spell just fine. She just had a friend who was in a rush, let's say. And, okay, well, I mean, she seems quite intent on it. And look, oh boy, in this second picture, there's a second woman officer. So they called all the women officers they could to try and make this collar, but there's still plenty of men hanging around there. By the way, I should point out for you, these sheriff's officers are wearing their badges on the outside of their coats, and they are wearing 6-pointed stars, and so Trump's right. There we go. Let's see. The woman jumped over a barricade, by the way, in order to do this, to run in front of Cosby, but did not make contact with the comedian, and that's probably why. She was cuffed and taken into custody shortly after the arrest. There's, I guess, a photo of Cosby and who's he with? His attorneys? Family members? I don't know which. And they're watching, and they are somewhat concerned about what's going on. The woman was one of several protesters, as I would have imagined, who stood outside the courtroom early Monday morning and chanted about the comedian. Cosby returned to court Monday to begin the retrial for the sexual assault case regarding allegations that he drugged and molested Andrea Constand in 2004. All right. Well, she's all about business, I must say. This protester looks extremely serious. So, well, I mean, you know, it's a wacky attention-getting stunt, but, you know, she doesn't look to be in it for the laughs, I'll tell you that. All right, let's see. Nor would it produce any, for that matter. But, okay, thank you, Kate, for reminding us of that being the case. I mean, that's news that would escape us, and it's a pretty prominent piece of our overall picture here, and I would otherwise probably have passed on that story. Let's see, Michael Musson commenting on the way here. The trouble with crazy voters, when we were talking to Greg, who is himself a crazy voter, the trouble with crazy voters is that they're unpredictable. What if reports of UFOs over the polling places keep them away? That's true. We cannot predict whether or not that would work for them. What else have you got here? Kate has another story here, the tweet of Kyle Griffin, and that's about 4 to 5% of the internet is Kyle Griffin tweets. One reason Latinos are afraid of adding a citizenship question to the 2020 census. You know, we all got a pretty good idea of what the hesitations might be about there, but one specific example, apparently Washington Post reporting that census data specifically was used to target Japanese Americans for internment during World War II. Yeah, almost certainly the case. Let's just click through and take a look at that article. Lori Aratani is the author of that piece. Secret use of census info helped send Japanese Americans to internment camps in World War II. That would have been my guess, I suppose. But on the other hand, I mean, they sent you to those camps whether you were a citizen or not, right? It's just, I guess, if they asked you about national origin, I don't know exactly how it worked during the World War II internment, but I don't think that they gave any pass to citizens of Japanese American ancestry, although I suppose it was easier for you to work your way out of the camps by joining the military, as some people were able to do. All right, well, that's perhaps a topic for another day, but a good call out and a good observation for those of us looking for some additional reading outside of things. Michael Musson had another comment here. Quote of the day from McConnell during Greg's segment that if voters are motivated by revulsion, then Republicans are in trouble. True, and a good quote at that. Arliss Bunny also chiming in on this one. I do think this Congress, if backed into a corner, would use emoluments because it keeps Pence clean. I see. Using emoluments to if they somehow found themselves forced to consider impeachment, emoluments might be the vehicle that they use because it keeps Pence's nose out of it and he stays clean, and they won't have that option, though. If they go all in on the Russia investigation, that's more likely to also implicate Pence. I wonder. Yeah, I mean, that's true. I'm just trying to think about whether or not there's any way of including Pence in that one. Although I guess once you get the ball rolling, I suppose anything goes. But yeah, I mean, I imagine if they were somehow forced to deal with a legitimate impeachment and for whatever reason came to the conclusion that their own political futures would be ended if they didn't deal with it, then I'm sure they probably would stay on something like emoluments. So let's say, and one more comment from Kate here. Grab it before it flies by. The key thing is that census data, back to the internment story, is supposed to be kept secret for decades. Oh, is that right? But our government has already violated that once, so Trump wouldn't hesitate. Could use location info to round up. Yeah, that's probably true. That's what everybody fears about the Latino, or what the Latino community and sympathizers, and also, constitutionalists and people who like privacy, or just census purists, for that matter, I guess, if there are such things. That's what worries them about this. And yeah, even had the precedent not existed, Trump would almost certainly not hesitate, at least to call for the use of census data for this thing anyway. It wouldn't disturb him in the least to know that he was the first to try it. The fact that he's not, and the fact that I guess that would have happened under a Democrat, never mind the fact that, total war and declarations of war, et cetera, might have perhaps provided some mitigating circumstances, some aggravating circumstances. Still widely regarded, usually widely regarded on our side of the ledger as an historic wrong. But as we know, the right wing celebrated, at least for a while, Michelle Malkin writing one of her first books about the case for internment, because that's how you make it in the conservative world. Be provocative and horrific, and that's how you'll make a name for yourself. All right, so let's see. Moving on from there, let's see if I can turn to Pocket and remind myself, what the hell happened this weekend? And between Pocket and Twitter, I'll remind myself, what weird things happened over the weekend, or what stories came out that will enlighten us about things we didn't finish up last week. There was the fire in Trump Tower, which was a weird occurrence, and fanned the flames, and that's not the reference I wanted to make, but fueled a mini story over the weekend, and I guess it's continuing on now because, there's a lot to it, and it's not worth much, but okay. So there was a fire in Trump Tower, and it was a fatal fire. A tenant on the 50th floor, I think, was killed in this fire. And then the story became that Trump Tower, in its residential floors, that is to say most of its upper floors, I guess, are without sprinkler systems, which became mandatory, I think, after the initial construction of Trump Tower. But also, I guess they were discussing at some point in New York City making retrofitting residential towers with sprinklers, which is, of course, a bit of an expense. And Trump, being extremely poor, as you know, lobbied very heavily with all the money that he didn't have against being required to install those sprinklers, at least in Trump Tower. But I can tell you this, Trump has been on, unsurprisingly, both sides of this issue, and was on both sides of this issue within months of the 1999 effort, I think, to require retrofitting these buildings with sprinklers. And as much as people were passing around these stories from January of 1999, people pulled out of the New York Times archives, January 1999 stories in which Trump has spent heavily on the campaigns of decision makers and has otherwise lobbied in opposition to a city ordinance, I guess, requiring retrofitting of sprinklers in buildings like Trump Tower. Too much. It's an enormous expense. I don't want to have to do it. And he seems to have won out there. On the other hand, I also have seen a March 1999 New York Times article in which Trump is said to have come around on the issue, at least after some initial discussion, some initial hesitation, and had, I guess, agreed to, and this might have been including them in the initial construction as opposed to retrofitting the sprinkler systems into Trump World Tower, where Kellyanne Conway and husband, I think, probably still own a property. They were living there prior to the election. And I think also one of the whole floors was sold out to the Saudi mission to the United Nations at one point, too. And so, but in that article, Trump is cited as saying that he thought sprinklers were a great idea because they made tenants feel more safe. Just interesting that even in 1999, Trump would say in January, I hate sprinklers and the whole thing is stupid and it's too expensive and nobody wants them. And then by March, in another building where his tenants do want them, saying it's a great idea and I'm happy to do it. And I personally spent $3 million to make it happen. So those of us who thought that even if you still think that the breakdown in his mental capacity is relatively new, his capacity for duplicity is decades old. It's his MO and always has been. So I thought that was kind of interesting too. I'm not terribly interested in pursuing the angle on the story which blames the death on Donald Trump, but if you are, go for it. I'm on your side. That one, I don't know why. I don't object to it. Who cares? I mean, essentially. And I will say this. When you dig into the story and then you start digging into the story of the guy who died, it's very weird. And we've been through this before. Trump Tower is full of wackos and criminals. And I don't know anything about this guy other than what was reported. But it was very quickly becoming a topic of conversation that he was an art dealer, which always raises eyebrows for me because I don't know. That just seems like whenever you need something weird, wacky, stupid, slightly dirty, dubious, no show, I don't know, smuggling something else, whether it's in a movie or a reality, art dealers are your guys. I don't know how many people honestly just make a $1 million living Trump Tower style in art dealership, but this guy wasn't one of them. Was also one of many who don't really make a living in art dealing. He was a leisure class art collector that sometimes resold, I guess, some of the paintings. And when people ask you what you do, the answer, I live off my dad's trust fund, is not generally one that they're willing to give. And so they say, oh, I'm an art dealer. Are you an art dealer? What art deals might you have put together that I might know about? None, because I don't know anything about art deals. And it's not really the way people talk about art dealership. But, the answer is I buy art because I like art and I've got a lot of money. And sometimes I sell the things. And sometimes I, even have contracts to do that stuff. And some of them have big price tags. And some things I actually do buy in order to think about reselling. And so that makes me an art dealer. But in reality, all I do is deplete my dad's trust fund. And I think largely that was the story with this guy too. And maybe I'm being unfair and I shouldn't speak ill of the dead, but doesn't matter. Here's another story that Donald Trump did, in fact, speak ill of the dead, and another minor story coming out that he apparently had in the past, some disparaging things to say about that particular individual. I don't know. It's just a very weird and complex story and not worth the candle, if you ask me. Let's look at some things that are. I put aside this tweet from fan Lisa Iannucci, who is sharing this one with us and including the KITM hashtag. The tweet of Justin Hendricks, who says, Facebook and Google had more to do with 2016 than we'll ever be able to tabulate. And he, Justin, is in turn referring to the tweet of David Beard, who tweets as D.A. Beard. I don't know whether his middle initial is A or he's just like the Beard, like the Bears. But he follows us, so maybe we should ask him. I note, for the record, from Twitter here, he is the contributing editor at Pointer. And let's see. Anything else that we should extract from this? No, but what are they? Pointer Institute? Is that what they call themselves? All right. Well, he has this to say in his tweet. New analysis shows Trump swamped. Before I even go ahead and read this, this is relevant to what Greg was telling us about a little bit a while ago about where people get their news in rural states. This came to mind because I knew we were holding this in reserve. News analysis shows Trump swamped America's news deserts. Have you ever thought about the fact that there were news deserts? His tweet goes on to describe them. Places lacking in trusted news sources with fewer than average news subscriptions. In other words, basically all you got news-wise, I guess now people have at least the ability to turn to cable news networks, but minus cable news networks, you're talking about local broadcast news, which is these days largely, in many cases, dictated from some central corporate office like Sinclair that says, these are the things you'll cover on the news. And your local on-the-ground producer will make sure that we have video of local car crashes or high school sports or whatever. But for the most part, this is what your news is going to be. And the local affiliates and they may still be hundreds of miles away from the people who are viewing these things, but they're considered the local affiliates, don't have the most robust news teams out there. And honestly, not the most interesting news items often happen in some of these places. And so they consider their job to be covering national items or sometimes localized human interest stories. And of course, the greater the concentration of corporate ownership, the more the likelihood that they're simply getting a daily package from corporate and then adding a little bit of local flavor in around the sides to make it look like it was produced in your area. And that's it. But in addition to that, even the print industry is, a big part of the desert. A locally owned newspaper that may have been around since, 18 whatever, these days is, in order to stay afloat, probably running mostly wire stories that, once again, even if it's not as centralized as things are with, or as deliberate as the way things are with Sinclair, if you're just running wire stories from around the world with very little local content, you might also describe this as a news desert, on top of which, because the papers are so lacking in genuine locally generated content, subscriptions are low and people pay less and less attention even to the national level packaged news stories that are supposed to keep them informed. And if they are, in fact, that they somehow develop that news junkie news addiction, they're turning to cable news to get it, and increasingly to places like Fox News or Fox News Network, Fox Business Channel, or other garbage. And it's very easy to, I guess, it would be particularly easy to dominate people's thinking, news thinking, in a news desert. Wouldn't that be the easiest place to do it? Oh, let's see. Let's go return to what David Beard was saying. New analysis shows Trump swamped America's news deserts, places lacking in trusted news sources with fewer than average news subscriptions. His popularity fell dramatically in places with higher than average news subscriptions, and you could probably guess where those might be. Coastal elites who are, even if they're not inside New York City or its immediate environs, might subscribe to the New York Times and the Washington Post and, let's say, a couple of news weekly magazines and maybe some other garbage too, who knows. But if you have 4 or 5 news or news-ish subscriptions per household, that probably puts you way, way, way above the national average and way, 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 way above the news desert average. So included here is a graph of some kind, and I guess the connection is to a Politico piece. The graph says Trump won most counties with the lowest newspaper circulation rates, and I guess that stands to reason. And that would have been a great Moneyball sort of play for someone like, I don't know, say Cambridge Analytica to come up with and say, let's target the places. I mean, they're rural, they're inclined to the conservative position, and there's no one to say we're wrong if we flood them with fake news. Good plan, evil, but good. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We are in our last segment, and it occurs to me that, we have so much to get to, as usual, that I might want to run around a little bit and say, okay, I acknowledge the following stories, some of which I will get to and some of which I will save for reading later, although you will have heard the story. Perhaps it's best if we digest it slowly over the next couple of days. One, it should be noted for the record that we were right. I don't know whether we actually discussed it here on the show, and by we, I mean me. But it's certainly something I've been talking about on Twitter and just figuring would eventually be announced as the case. And we now have confirmation, and it came, I think, late Friday. Here's a Politico story about it. Yes, Scott Pruitt was eventually evicted from that sweetheart apartment. That's what I figured was the case. That's what I tweeted about a couple of times during the last week or so. Eventually we were going to get around to when they talked about damaging the door and having the agents kick the door in. I started to think, you know what? There's this weird, vague language about Pruitt's exit from this apartment, from this living situation. And it sounds like weasel words to me. And, you know, but it was unclear as to why he left it. I mean, if you get a deal like that, you would never leave it unless there were some either predetermined end date that just for whatever reason you couldn't continue beyond that, et cetera, et cetera. And then, of course, we started talking about damage to the door. And then when you started to have reports that his daughter also lived there and the landlords, though I think they may also be lying about this, seeking distance from the controversial nature of this arrangement. But they started to say, yeah, we never gave permission for him to have his daughter live there. They initially tried to deny that they even gave him permission to use the kitchen, which it sounds like a ridiculous argument to me. I don't think that anybody would have accepted that living arrangement, and Pruitt would have been foolish to do it anyway. But it became increasingly obvious that between that and the weasel wording about how and why that arrangement came to an end, because there was also some initial reporting that once it did come to an end, he still sort of had no fixed permanent address in Washington, D.C. for some time, and then he began leaning on EPA staffers to try to schedule trips for him out of Washington, D.C., and hopefully back to Oklahoma, because he didn't actually have a place to lay his head while he was in D.C., Pruitt, one of the few members of the Trump cabinet not independently or otherwise fabulously wealthy, and he's been a bit of a grifter for a long, long time. And as a matter of fact, we were let me stick to the storyline here. Anyway, once it became clear that they weren't going to give a clear, understandable, definitive storyline for his departure from the building, I figured, yeah, they kicked this guy out. They smashed the door in. He wasn't paying on time. He was always late with the payments. He had his daughter there. He shouldn't have. we now have at least the landlord's claim via Politico here. Eliana Johnson's reporting of last week. Lobbyist couple had to change the locks on Pruitt. They actually grew tired of the late payments. And remember, the payments are next to nothing. I mean, for that house, that condo, I mean, $50 is $50. And not everybody can come up with $50 a day. And Scott Pruitt, incidentally, might be one of those people that can't, as it turns out. We're reminded by some earlier reporting that's coming back to light. But still, you're going to have to come up with the money. I don't know what the arrangement was and how often he was supposed to pay. But the claim, again, from these lobbyists who might just be interested in distancing themselves from Pruitt just so they don't end up, accused in the trial that eventually comes over this, that, he was always late in his payments and they got fed up and they ended up changing the locks. A couple people have said, I don't think that was really the way it went either. The lobbyists aren't just going to change the locks on the EPA administrator. And that's probably true. But that's their claim for the moment. Anyway, and I mentioned to you, maybe Scott Pruitt is the kind of person who can't always come up with the $50, and, that by itself doesn't make anybody a bad person. Of course, what makes somebody a bad person is, one, he's a cheater, and two, he might have been very easily able to come up with the $50 and didn't want to because he's a cheapskate. But remember, we were reminded over the weekend, and it was brought up again almost anew, but we did share this story with you when it came out, and the people that I saw bringing it up anew were the people who initially reported it, so they're entitled to do it. It was over at The Intercept. You remember back in December, we read the story over at The Intercept of Pruitt's good friend who gave him a sweetheart loan situation, which wasn't even a loan. It just ended up being a grant of, several $100,000. But you recall, here are the details that I remember off the top of my head, that as Attorney General of Oklahoma, he was making the miserable salary of $38,400, which is a fine salary for anybody else. But for the, for the Attorney General of an actual state, and Oklahoma to date does remain an actual state, that's a problem. And honestly, in the anti-tax environment, the anti-government environment, you can't get the guy any more money, I guess. But honestly, the Attorney General of Oklahoma ought to make more than that. I feel your pain, Scott Pruitt. I just don't approve of your methods. He rectified the situation by purchasing a $600 and something thousand home, which obviously you're not able to afford on 38.4. But he had a good friend in the banking business who decided to loan him the money nonetheless. And in fact, why not loan you the money for a $900 and something thousand mortgage so that you can take a couple $100,000 cash to go as well? And hey, don't worry about paying back the loan. In addition to which, why don't you flip that house and sell it off to a corporate shell that I and some other friends of yours will create, and will eat the loss, but you can convert all the gains into private cash, which you can then decline to pay to the Hearts $50 at a time some years hence. But this was the guy that you may, if it doesn't ring a bell, it might ring a bell when I say that this is the guy who ended up getting caught by the authorities and being banned for life from banking. Do you remember that phrase? And I was so astonished. I'd never heard of anybody having been banned for life, really from anything, but from banking in particular. I didn't know that was a penalty they could bring down on you. And you might even remember that the guy that this happened to was at one point prior to this, the president of the American Bankers Association, which really seems like a black eye for that association. Anyway, he landed on his feet just fine. Of course, he ended up being the Superfund administrator at EPA under Scott Pruitt. So that was a nice kickback for him. But it was a particularly egregious story. As I recall, the bank went under, and the guy looted and destroyed a bank that basically had been, I thought it was like it was in his family's bank, because dad or his grandfather started this bank. Ordinarily, that's the kind of bank in Oklahoma, wherever. I don't know whether it's a small town bank or not, but it was in Oklahoma. And a community bank thing where they were the respected banking family, well-to-do, and helped everybody buy their local businesses or their homes or whatever, and respectable people that didn't necessarily gain a reputation for, though they may secretly have been looting everybody the whole time. Who knows? But I don't know. It seems like particularly egregious to me that you would do that to your family bank and then abscond with all that money. And then, well, I got caught. Big deal. I'll just take a huge high-ranking job, probably no show in the Environmental Protection Agency in Washington, D.C., because the guy I bailed out with all this money, the guy I gave half the money to that ruined this bank, is on the take and in D.C. now, and he'll help me land on my feet. You remember that? Anyway, we recognized it early. That's what we do on the show. Bruce McFarlane was talking about the fact that he saw this story being re-upped, essentially, and I think it was Ryan Grimm from The Intercept who was re-upping it. And so it's okay, but it was nice to see Bruce saying, I read about this, or we heard about this a long time ago on Kagro in the Morning. And it's not that Ryan is a late comer to the story. He's the original comer to the story. It wasn't his story, but he was the first one to promote it. That's his job at The Intercept. That's how I saw it. That's how I found it. That's how I read it. So good on The Intercept and good on Ryan Grimm there. And good on us, too. That's what we do. We try and recognize good stories that are worth sharing and that we ought to be keeping our eye on. And we share them. And then even if they don't catch on at the moment, if they catch on later, we say, see, we knew from the beginning that was a good story. And then we all pat ourselves on the back about how smart we are for reading them and or listening to them being read. Let's see. Where are we here? Oh, Karen had this comment about the news deserts. David, you mean forward-looking parts of the country voted for Clinton and backward-looking parts of the country voted for Trump? Yes, that's it. Good thing you're not wearing a pantsuit, or are you? No, well, pants, yes. Suit, no. This count as I guess if Hillary Clinton wore this, it might be a pantsuit. I don't know. I might be wearing a pantsuit, and I have no idea. Let's see. Oh, Jack Ox 48 says he knows a lot about the art world, being an artist who is international. Oh, good. I'm correct. I thought I was incorrect. And you are correct about art dealers. Often they are there to launder money. This is a fact. Ooh, yeah, that's probably, I mean, look, that's the case in the movies, right? Even as far back as Beverly Hills Cop, the bad guy was an art dealer, ostensibly, but he was instead smuggling. What was he smuggling? With some drugs, some other stuff. I don't know. Art dealers, it's a little weird out there. I mean, you know what? It's a lot like the rug business in a way. You remember, and you think I'm being random. You don't remember that Paul Manafort was on the hook for buying like $1 million worth of rugs or something. And then we found this fascinating underworld of money laundering / pre-modern day banking system that worked through the rug trade. I mean, it was actually quite fascinating, I thought, and quite innovative and ingenious as well. And probably only in latter days became just, mostly about laundering money. But art could work the same way. How much is this painting worth? I don't know. Whatever the F you want to say it's worth. And that's the problem. And so here's how you arbitrage. Use arbitrage to launder money. You say it's worth X. I say it's worth Y. The difference gets put in somebody's pocket. Real estate works the same way. How much is this apartment worth? It's worth $500,000. It's a very expensive apartment. Fine. I'll pay you $1.5 million for it because I'm Russian and I stole all this money. That's not why I stole it. I'm a mobster. That's why I stole it. I'm from Russia. That makes me a Russian mobster. But mobsters from anywhere could be just as guilty. I'm not saying there's anything inherently wrong with Russians, but you might want to keep an eye on them. Just saying. And so you do that, you overpay for the apartment because who's to say that you overpaid? Or let's say, how much did you pay for this fabulous piece of land with a crumbling estate home on it here in Florida? $40 million. I'll pay you $100 million for it. And the house will be torn down. Who's to say if that's laundering or a bribe? Well, I'll tell you. But from the perspective of the authorities who have typically the power to actually do something about it and could prosecute you for you and put you in jail for it. They just say, I know it's probably dirty, but we have so many other things to get to, just like this show, that you just let it slide. Art, rugs are art, essentially, so not hard to understand. Real estate, not really art in any serious way, but just to say, anything with subjective valuation. So thank you, Jack, for saying that. I was afraid that comment was going to be, I know a lot about the art world, and I have lots of friends who are art dealers, and you're so offensive. But luckily it did turn out that they're all scumbags. So I'm in the clear. I'm sure there are very wonderful art dealers out there. They're just not the millionaire playboy art dealers. If you're a millionaire playboy something, then what you are is a millionaire playboy. The other thing is a sideline, and it's probably about ways to get money or hide the money that you get in order to be the millionaire playboy. All right, other news worth catching up on and teasing for future shows. It turns out somehow Jared Kushner has gotten his $1 billion that he needed to save 666 Fifth Avenue. No one knows exactly how it happened or where it came from, only that he keeps flying to the Middle East and speaking to Saudis, Qataris, and Emiratis, and Chinese, and somehow has come away with the money. And this should be a bigger story, but it only will become a bigger story when real reporters, unlike me, who just reads newspaper stories, dig this out. Judd Legum at Think Progress is the documenter of this story. And let's see, he starts out by grabbing, what is this? Oh, is this supposed to, I can't tell. Is this supposed to be there's an image in this and it's missing. This must be the caption to it. The 41-story skyscraper at 666 Fifth Avenue in Manhattan was supposed to be Jared Kushner's signature development. You know all about that. It turned out instead to be an unmitigated disaster. They bought it, or he bought it, for $1.8 billion, the most ever paid for an office tower. You remember all that. It was supposed to catapult the family real estate firm, previously known for mid-priced apartments in New Jersey, which is not so bad, into the big leagues. Been instead a disaster. Shortly after the sale, the recession hit, the market crashed. They ended up having to sell the building's lucrative retail space, nearly half the office space, to Vornado Realty Trust, right? And it was to Vornado that they owed this $1.2 billion payment on the mortgage that was coming due February of next year, and for which Kushner was alleged to have been scrambling wildly to come up with the payments, or else all would be lost. He went to Qatar to talk to the Qataris about the investment from the Sovereign Wealth Fund. They said no. He left. Saudi Arabia and the UAE suddenly got the green light to blockade Qatar and isolate them and cause disaster and drive things to the brink of war in the Persian Gulf. But it was all just coincidence. You get the idea. Anyway, here's kind of, sort of, an explanation of what happened. Upon entering the White House, Judd's piece continues, Jared Kushner divested the property only in the most technical sense. He, quote, sold the assets to his brother and a trust controlled by his mother. A lawyer described the transaction to the New York Times as a shell game, because that's what it was. Now, Kushner, ensconced as a senior advisor in the White House, someone who has emerged to bail him out. Someone has now emerged to bail him and his family out of this mess. The identity of Kushner's white knight, Booby, Hans Booby, I'm your white knight. The identity, a mystery. In a filing with the SEC on Friday, Vornado revealed the existence of an extraordinary handshake, and that's in scare quotes, handshake agreement that would not only refinance the $1.2 billion, but allow the Kushners to buy out Vornado's portion of the debt. This means the Kushners would once again own the entire office tower and Vornado would only own the retail space. The key question, however, is who would lend $1.2 billion to the Kushners, who are, after all, ensconced in the White House, to refinance an aging office tower with high vacancy rates. As of now, neither the Kushners nor Vornado is revealing who facilitated the deal. The existence of the deal, however, raises troubling questions about whether it's based on the economic potential of the property or an effort to gain access and influence in the Trump White House. And that's a big question here. So a little bit of background, by the way, though. The Kushner's international adventure. The building has a mortgage, as you know. That's the $1.2 billion. This has forced Kushner and family to get creative. Days after the election, in a, quote, private dining room of the restaurant La Cine at Waldorf Astoria Hotel in Midtown Manhattan, Kushner met with Wu Jiahui. That's my best guess at that. The chairman of the Anbang Insurance Group, described here as a mysterious Chinese company with links to the Chinese government. They thought they had a deal. That fell apart amid rising concerns about a conflict of interest. There's the trip to Qatar. There's the blockade. All of this already on the record. I think I should probably move on at this point. I simply really just wanted to note the fact that it seems like he's found his bailout, and now it's up to the journalist community to try to dig out which black hat did he get this money from and why? What did they get in return? There's also, I should enter onto the record, the related item of another profile, this time in New Yorker, a Saudi prince's quest to remake the Middle East. And I think we even may have mentioned this one when we spoke last, or maybe Arliss brought it up. But another profile of Mohammed bin Salman with Jared Kushner looming in the background of this one. We'll have to spend some time on this one on another day. But just the fact that it's out there and will require some review, I thought made some good sense to mention. All right, let's see. A few other things. There's also, by the way, a new piece out there on the fall of Milo Yiannopoulos. We might all enjoy taking a look at that one. And let's see. Some very interesting developments on the Facebook and Cambridge Analytica front as well, including an article in The Guardian by Christopher Wiley, the young Canadian guy who we profiled a few weeks back with other Guardian pieces. I read the profiles of in The Guardian. He was the guy who helped build what became Cambridge Analytica and now is a bit of a whistleblower on that front. He writes a piece, Why I Broke the Facebook Data Story and What Should Happen Now, and with a particular focus on what happened in England and Britain with the Brexit vote, which will, of course, have great implications of varying kinds here in the United States and on our voting as well. That and, let's see, an interesting piece that maybe could go with it from Travis Geddes over at Raw Story. I've got this headline, former FBI agent Clint Watts, you know, we hear his name all the time, explains why trolls are the bleak future of politics. That one we could probably get through before moving on to one or two more items before wrapping up for the day. Internet trolls who helped get President Donald Trump elected in 2016, and a former FBI counterterrorism expert explained why social media manipulation will become a key strategy for all politicians. The Kremlin pioneered political trolling by seamlessly fusing hacking and influence, and they used stolen data to mount propaganda campaigns around the clock in countries all over the world, including the U.S., and that successful campaign will be copied, wrote cybersecurity expert Clint Watts for the Daily Beast, and perhaps we should take a look one day at that full article. By the way, I think from the Wiley piece, we understand that the number of Facebook profiles stolen or improperly compiled anyway in this database has grown again, and the specter has been raised that the data from those profiles has been captured and is stored in Russia for use by Russians in the future. I mean, the fact that the data was stolen, pilfered, whatever, and then compiled was frightening enough. And we didn't ask the question of where is it now, because data isn't just something that you often ask that question about. But I guess it is a relevant one. And I suppose if it exists even in a copy only in Russia, that's problematic. You're not going to be able to recover that And it wouldn't be able to recover that very easily or reliably here in the United States, much less in Russia. Anyway, just to make long story short for the Daily Beast version of things, Raw Story always does an admirable job there. Trolling as a service, one-stop shops for analyzing, engaging, and mobilizing online audiences will be a method all political campaigns will seek to exploit in the future, Watts wrote, and I fear he may be right about that. Watts said campaigns would exploit social media data to target voters with ads preying on their emotional vulnerabilities, or whether they live in a news desert, for instance, and then mobilize engaged audiences to destroy political foes while hiding the source of the attacks. The world shouldn't be surprised Cambridge Analytica moved to offer the precursor to trolling as a service, Watts wrote. We should instead be surprised that it's the only one we know about to date. Probably a good point. He warned that the selection of Brad Parscale, who ran Trump's digital campaign in 2016 as the president's re-election campaign manager, was an ominous sign. We are in agreement there. If left unchecked, politicians and their political parties, super PACs, lobbyists, and corporate public relations firms will seek out trolling as a service to dominate the information space toward their advantage. Interesting. But to the detriment of society, Watts wrote. A template has already been established for using hackers to compromise political foes and then using trolls to stage events, generate a false sense of support, and push provocative themes. Great reward will come to the entrepreneur with enough startup capital to harvest and correlate large amounts of personal data on distinguishable voting blocks and then mine those details rapidly and incisively by employing machine learning, Watts wrote. From there, rented troll farms will deploy sophisticated computational propaganda to alter the information environment and employ humans to act as for-hire propagandists advancing their client's message and tackling their client's adversaries. Or adversaries, depending on how you want to pronounce that. And I think that's probably true and scary, and I missed my calling. Once again, I was a couple years too early. If I had known, if I could have argued with my parents that being a jerk on the internet is a viable career path. I don't know if that's really the case yet, but it's emerging as one. Back in my day, when I had to argue with my parents about emerging fields, it was me trying to convince my dad in the late 80s / early 90s as I finished and graduated from college that political consulting was a real and serious sector and that you ought to give some thought to the possibility that, yes, I could move to Washington, D.C. and enter that field and make a living at it. Political consulting, what's that? Never heard of it. And then by 1992, this would have been 1990, right after my graduation, I'm sure. By 1992, of course, Carville and Begala had made the profession of political consulting famous. I mean, there were political consultants before that, but they were the ones that made it famous to mainstream America. And my dad suddenly said, oh my gosh, that's a real thing. Now, of course, it would be kids saying, by the way, I spent plenty of time being a jerk online even before the internet back in my day. And if I had known that that was a viable field, I would have opted for that one instead. Anyway, I don't know whether it's really going to become one or not, but it's certainly emerging as one. And I guess it's something I'll have to keep in mind as my son currently tries to argue to me that you can be a professional video game player. And that sounds like improbable or like only a very few people do it. But then he's telling me now about esports, which I thought, isn't that some sort of, are you kidding? Is that a joke? And now I'm reading, as he's pointing out to me, there are colleges that are fielding esports teams. And I thought, what a nice, pleasant pastime for kids to do. It's like a club of some kind. Sure, why not? No, they're competing intercollegiately. Okay, sure. Like a club sport. No, but for like money. And the NCAA might even get involved. And now there are colleges offering scholarships in it. And I thought that was perhaps an exaggeration. I looked it up, and it's true. Not colleges that I would ordinarily have thought about having these guys who have pretty good grades and test scores attending. But and I'm certainly not saying I'm convinced that they can turn around and go there because video games, but similar thing. And once again, parents behind the times, kids know what's going on. So how about that? Being a paid troll on the internet could have been a growth industry. We'll get back to that and much more when we return to the air tomorrow. I'm sure we'll be discussing this all week. We'll try and catch up on the news. Wednesday, of course, We'll be back with Greg Dworkin and also Joan McCarter to stay grounded in real news. In the meantime, if you have a real news need, here's a great place to catch up with it, right here on Netroots Radio, because next up is the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Justice Putnam, starting off in his Bistro Cafe, as he likes to say. Larry Kudlow can't name a single member of his supposed trade coalition of the willing who are joining the United States in imposing tariffs on China, but he did lie a lot. So you'll catch up on those lies. On the rest of the menu, chat room transcripts reveal the neo-Nazi Traditional Workers' Party's violent ideology. Analysts predict Zuckerberg will be facing his own Custer's last stand when he appears in front of Capitol Hill on Tuesday and Wednesday. And Jared Kushner, there's the $1.2 billion miracle after all. He'll discuss that further on his show next.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Thanks for listening. Still more to come on Justice's program here. Let's see, where the Hanford nuclear plant demolition in Washington State is halted after 42 workers are exposed to radioactive particles. And Hungary's far-right Jobbik party, long known for its overt racism and anti-Semitism, is trying to reinvent himself as warm and fuzzy. Next.